This might be worth thinking about a little bit more. I think it's very easy for people outside academia to confuse four very distinct areas of study: biblical studies, religious studies, theology, and philosophy of religion. It may seem from an outside perspective that this is all basically the same thing, but they're quite distinct topics. You could get a PhD in any one of them, and you would hardly touch on the same material that you cover in the other ones. Each of them has their own object of study. Each of them has their own tools to go about that study, and each of them has a very different relationship to this proposition of whether or not God exists. Biblical studies is the study of the Bible's literature, primarily using tools drawn from elsewhere in the humanities. So critical historical analysis, critical literary analysis, linguistic studies, stuff like that. And biblical studies, by and large, does not care whether or not God exists because it's irrelevant to the study of the Bible as literature. Religious studies is the study of religious belief and practice, primarily using tools drawn from the social sciences, so things like cultural anthropology, sociology, psychology on occasion. And again, religious studies is largely apathetic to this question about whether or not God exists because, again, it's pretty irrelevant for studying religious belief and practice of various people groups. Theology is a study of the nature of God and God's relationship to the world. Theology uses some tools borrowed from philosophy and then some other idiosyncratic tools that it sort of developed for itself over time. Theology is primarily done from a confessional perspective by people who have come to believe that God exists, and they are, again, largely apathetic to trying to demonstrate God's existence to random people on the internet who happen to believe otherwise. They're obviously not going to stop the advancement of their field because of your or anybody else's personal incredulity. That would be rather silly. And then there's a philosophy of religion, which considers this question of God's existence and God's attributes and what sorts of philosophical justifications we can give for belief in any of those things. And the philosophy of religion is done by both theists and atheists and other people besides. For a great example of an atheistic philosopher of religion, a leading proponent of the philosophy of religion would be Graham Oppy, who's written a wonderful book introducing atheism and the underlying worldview of naturalism. For good examples of theistic philosophers of religion who may provide some of that evidence that you're looking for God's existence, I would recommend William Lane Craig or Alvin Plantinga or Josh Rasmussen if you want a younger guy. You may be surprised to find that atheistic philosophers of religion like Graham Oppy don't take this line that there is no evidence for God's existence. Indeed, Graham Oppy says that belief in God can be rationally justified. This idea that there is no evidence for God's existence is usually just something that you hear online amongst internet atheists who haven't really considered the issue and often just lack the philosophical training necessary to be able to consider the issue with any seriousness. So that's why you usually won't find biblical scholars like me or theologians or scholars of religion pausing what they're doing to try and persuade you that God exists, because it's simply outside our field.